think so.
Oh, connection available.
All right.
All right.
I think you're on.
Are we on? Are we on? I think we're on.
Anybody out there can hear us?
Nobody's watching yet. So go here.
Go where?
Oh, I thought you could go here, but you can't. So apparently I have to go to your page and get on your page.
All right. You were wrong.
I was wrong. Oh, now we got 3 people.
All right. Well, wait a minute. So I can show Ron that I was right.
Hi, Kelly. Hi, Diane. You have to show me you're right.
I'm always right.
You're always right. Hi, Bart. Am I on the big screen?
Cute shirt. Thank you. Right. Happening now. All right. Let's get you going here. You can start talking. I'll figure
All right.
it out.
We've got a few people watching, so we're going to go ahead and start chatting a little bit. And thank you for showing up and to taste with us. Hi, Barb. And we appreciate everybody coming back for this week. And we've got sort of an interesting lineup. When I poured them, I thought that they were very pretty in the glass.
They're pretty.
The white, rosé, and red in the glass. So I thought they looked very nice in the glass. We were trying to do a little bit of a summer theme maybe, so that's why we chose the rosé. Although today and with the snow, it is not very summery, but so be it. I'm glad I didn't get the convertible out there last week. Anything else going on this week?
Nope.
Nope.
But I know.
It's Monday. It feels like a Monday, although aren't we all kind of confused on like what day it is?
Yes.
It's ridiculous. I was going to try out some new technology tonight, and that didn't work out too well. So we're back to the phone. But between now and a few weeks from now, I want to make sure I can get some new technology, because my hope is that we host a tasting with a winemaker, and where we'll get the winemaker on board so that I can sit and sort of host from my house, and he can sit in his house out in Walla Walla, Washington, and we can have him taste us through some wines so that everybody can buy all 3 of the wines. And hi, Kara. And taste all 3 of the wines with him telling us about them and what he sees in them in his vision, and answer some questions. I just have to figure it out. But we're going to do that, and that'll be really cool. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about next week wines that we're going to try. So
You can start. I still
I
have
can
to find.
start?
I still am trying to find us.
Okay, trying to find us. I'm here. So the first wine tonight, and I'm guessing just like everybody has done in weeks past, it's 7 o'clock, so I anticipate most of you have already started enjoying the wines. Hopefully enjoying them, tasting them, thinking about them, so that you can share your thoughts on what you're tasting in them. The first one is obviously a really inexpensive bottle of wine, $9. And one of the things that we have found at the shop, and when we've talked to some people out in the community over the 16 years we've been in business, is sometimes people think we're this sort of boutique-y, expensive-only wines, and that's not the reality. The reality is, for all you who are customers, you know that you can come through the door, you can find really great daily drinking wines, and I think this is one of those wines. This is sort of an albatross, though. It's sort of a weird thing. And in as much as the taste, the tech sheet that you guys got with them was something I typed up. And it's clear because there's a bunch of typos in it, which I discovered after I was reviewing it.
He did not have me review.
I did not.
Or Kira, he didn't have you review.
Yeah. So I will point out where I was clearly wrong in a couple things I said and correct it through the tasting. But Lindeman's, excuse me, Lindeman's as a winery was actually started, and you can see by the label that the year is on here is 1843. Was started in Australia, and they started making their wines, and in the 1980s is when they sort of became really popular and on a worldwide basis. With that, they started making a whole bunch of wines, really reasonably priced, but in Australia. This one is made pretty much from everything I could find, and it's a really low price point, so they're not going to spend a lot of time making a full text sheet like you've gotten in the past and like a couple of the other ones we have tonight. But they're making this one in South Africa. And if we had the Australian one to taste side by side, you'd notice some major differences. But this one's in South Africa, and we love South African wine. We've been to South Africa. It's a beautiful country, and they make a lot of really great wine there. But this one's made in the same vein, the same way that the one in Australia is made. So it is 100% Chardonnay. It's matured in French oak. I don't know how long. I couldn't find any information on that. Looking at the tasting sheet that I drew up here for you guys, the Hunter Valley, where a lot of the other Lindemans, or where the Lindemans wines are made in Australia, is a very warm climate. It's very inland, so it's protected by mountain ranges from all the coastal breezes, and the ocean doesn't cool it down, so it gets very warm. Unlike if you look at the map, and I think hopefully everybody got a map of the wines of South Africa, or the wine regions of South Africa. It's a cooler climate right along the coast in South Africa because of all the ocean influences. So this wine is going to be a lot leaner, lower in alcohol, and that's where I screwed up. So the cooler climate results in less tropical fruit, lower alcohol, not higher alcohol, as I screwed up on the tasting sheet, and it doesn't have that tropical fruit roundness. So it's going to have a little bit higher acid because of the cooler climate. So the other thing that's sort of interesting about this wine is that I can't find a vintage on the bottle. I can't find a vintage online about it. I can't find any information online about it. And so a lot of people think about, okay, so why isn't there a vintage on the bottle? The vintage, the year, when you talk about a 2014 or a 2018, like in the rosé, that's the year that the grapes were grown and harvested. This one is a non-vintage, so if you ever see an NV, N as in Nora, V as in Victor, after the wine, means it's a non-vintage, which basically means that they didn't have, either perhaps by law, there's a lot of laws out there that say a certain percentage of the grapes that go into the wine have to be from that harvest year in order to put the vintage year on the bottle. So maybe they didn't match that, or maybe they don't do it because they're making what in Champagne you would refer to as a house style of wine, where they keep back a portion of the wine year in and year out so that they can blend it with the next vintage, with the next vintage, with the next vintage. I'm not talking about like they save, wine from 5 years ago is blended into the current day's wine. I'm saying that maybe over the course of certainly 2 years, they're constantly blending so that they get this really consistent style of wine. So anyway, $9 South African Chardonnay.
A couple of comments, and I commented on it. Do you know if this has gone through malolactic?
I do not know. I could not find any tech information on it. I will make an educated guess based on tasting it that it probably has not gone through, it certainly hasn't gone through 100% malolactic. The telltale signs if a wine goes through malolactic fermentation, which again is the transition of the malic acid, which is crisp apple acid, to lactic acid, which is the round acid of milk. The telltale characteristics are a buttery characteristic. It's from the diacetyl that is created in that. So a buttery dairy notes and a little bit rounder, softer mouthfeel than a sharper acid. And from tasting this, I think this one's pretty crisp. So I'm guessing that maybe a little bit of ML, but probably not. A little toffee aroma. That toffee aroma would be from the oak.
Although, how much oak? Did you find anything?
No, it just says French oak. And you can get a little bit of the butterscotch toffee characteristic from the malolactic fermentation as well. So as we sip and taste this, and I haven't tasted it yet.
It is crisper than I was expecting. I thought based on the nose there'd be a little bit
You got a good mouth water. So yes, definitely oak noted. Mouthfeel, get mouth watering from that acid. A couple interesting things about South Africa as a wine region. If you look at the map, hopefully you all got the map. The overall map that you see there is kind of like the Western Cape, and then there's also the Cape South Coast region on the southern portion. All the other identified regions on the map are the subregions within the overall Western Cape. Western Cape is the largest wine producing region in South Africa. Really interesting history of South Africa is we're not going to go into it, but obviously there was a whole bunch of really bad societal things going on with apartheid and the racism and all the classes and things like that. Well, that struck through all the wine world. So back in the 1700s, the British pretty much colonized South Africa. It was first sort of discovered in the 1600s by Jan van Riebeck with the Dutch Indian Trading Company. And they set up an outpost there to facilitate trading of textiles and things like that up north of England.
I'm just looking at your notes.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay.
You can...
And then in the 1700s, Britain, late 1700s, Britain occupied it. And in order to sustain the economy, because obviously Britain was the biggest world power there. And if you ever really want to learn about world history, doing it through a wine education is an absolute fantastic way to do it. There's a great book called Wine and War that talks about World War II and Germany and France and a whole bunch of other places, which is a fantastic book. But when Britain took over and occupied South Africa, they pretty much started making wine, developing cooperatives, and really, really increasing wine production there to support their drinking and also to support the local habit. And when that happened, other countries that Britain was getting a lot of wine from, France, Spain a little bit, that started dropping down or dropping off because Britain started to support their own economy, their own South African economy, by buying a whole bunch of wine and having it shipped up to England. So it's a really interesting sort of just history lesson there. Then the next thing that's sort of interesting, in about 1990 when apartheid was abolished, and later in the 1990s, the cooperatives. So in South Africa, the cooperatives were really important. And the cooperatives basically where they made the wine, and they had a whole bunch of local farmers bring all their grapes in and made the wine. Well, of course, in any situation like that, especially in that day and age, the farmers weren't getting properly compensated, and so the cooperatives really got big. After apartheid was abolished, and into the 70s, or into the late 90s, 1997, the cooperatives were abolished, and the biggest cooperative, KWV, was actually turned into a private company. And so it wasn't no longer like a government run or anything like that. It was during the 1990s that South African wine really started to turn on, where you had a whole bunch of money, you had winemakers from all over the world go there to make wine. You had this sort of garagista, as they say in France, these garage winemakers, where you really saw this innovation. And now, when you look at the wine industry there, it's amazing. And when we traveled there, we saw some phenomenal wines. And we carry some in the shop, but they get a lot of press, a lot of attention these days. But anyway, this is an inexpensive South African Chard, and I think it really presents well for $9.
And I actually want to address a little bit more about the oak, because several comments have come across about that. As Ron noted on his sheet, remember this is something he created. This isn't from the winery. It has French oak, but that doesn't mean that it's been aged a long time in French oak. The other thing is that, for those who don't know, a French oak barrel can be $1,000 to $1,200. If they're using new French oak to create a $9 bottle of wine, they can't. It just isn't going to work. So my guess is, although they're using French oak, they're not necessarily aging it. It's not necessarily new French oak, because they would never be able to afford to bottle this wine. Yes?
Yes, totally agree.
So, yes. So as a reminder, this is Ron's notes. So
my notes, and they're not very good notes. You can just toss them. So. All right, but we like that for $9. I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Moving on to rosé.
We're gonna move on to the rosé. So we're going to move from Chardonnay to a Malbec, and it's going to be a rosé of Malbec.
It's okay, Ron. You can just keep... He gets distracted. He's like a child.
I want to see the comments.
You'll see him later.
I'm like a child, so what?
So.
All right, so we're going to move on to rosé. Now, I know most of you probably drink plenty of rosés, so you understand that the vast majority of rosés produced in the entire world are dry. When I say dry, I mean that in the wine world, dry and sweet are opposites. So dry wines have very little residual sugar and probably not enough residual sugar where you're going to perceive it. So the rosés that we drink, the rosés that we carry, are all dry, not sweet.
We actually don't have a single sweet rosé at either shop right now. We have carried in occasionally in the past. We have them, but right now, pretty much everything you have or we have that you're going to have when you buy it from us is going to be a dry rosé.
And the beautiful thing about rosés, people say that they don't like rosés, they're pink, whatever. Rosés, to me, are the best deck or patio on hot summer days, hot weather, because if you're like a red wine drinker and you don't drink a lot of white wine, rosés give you a little bit of red wine characteristic, but you can serve them more chilled, so they're crisp, they're give you the fruit, but they also are refreshing. It's not like you're going to, I always say, on an 85-degree day, you're not going to open a bottle of Cabernet to drink on the deck. That's just not refreshing. It's just not kind of the way you're going to drink wine.
And I think Ron has said earlier that we all drink rosé. I don't think that's true. I think Ron and I drink rosé, and many of our friends drink rosé. I don't think enough people drink rosé. I don't think they realize how good it is, actually. And I think real men drink pink, and I'm glad you do, honey. It makes me happy. So, and yes, for those who are looking at the bottle, Sarah, it is a great bottle. You all have seen it. It's an amazing bottle. It's a strong woman.
They have it, so I don't think that...
Well, not everybody has it. We've got some people who might be on who don't have it.
And you can tell that being cooped up with this whole COVID-19 thing is making her a little bit wacky.
I got out today. I had to go out for work for an hour.
I did not. I continued demolishing our bathroom that I'm renovating. All right, let's talk about this wine. So the producer makes a lot of wine in a lot of different styles, a lot of different varietals. And this one is Malbec. Malbec is, of course, one of the most famous for the wines of Bordeaux, France, where it is one of the 5 permitted red varietals. In Bordeaux. It's grown all over the world now. You can tell it's very salmon color. It's not very pink. It's a much more sort of salmon orange, salmon pink color. Really cool look to it. You get that color. So the color in wine comes from the skins of the grapes. And in rosés, the way they make a lot of them, they can make them in several different ways. The way this one is made is they harvest all the grapes. They put them into a crusher, a press, a wine press, and they let it sit for maybe a very short period of time. They don't let it do any fermentation, and they just basically squeeze it right away, and the juice comes out a really, really light pink. Other ways that they'll make it, they can actually let the grapes sit for a little bit longer so that more color gets extracted from the skins into the wine. So you start to get a lot more of a pink or a red or a light red color, and they will oftentimes let the wine start to ferment and then drain that first juice off, like free run juice, and then they'll let it finish fermenting in that way. And there you're going to get a much deeper color. And one of the trends we see in the wine world is what people call deep rosés. So there's a rosé, Robert Mondavi, the I Am Rosé. There's a bunch of them out there. I actually listen to the Peter Mondavi, yeah.
Not Robert Mondavi.
No. Right. Sorry,
wrong Mondavi. Hopefully none of the Mondavis are offended by us.
You need a family tree to keep track of them. Right? You need a flow chart. I don't know where I was going. I was listening to a podcast this past summer.
Deep rosés.
And they're talking about the deep rosés, like where it's almost like the color of Pinot Noir or the consistency of Pinot Noir. And so there's lots of talk that might be a trend. Myself, I like this style rosé. I like the rosés of the southern France, like Provence and things like that, where they're just crisp and acidic.
So We had one interesting comment on what this smelled like, and I'll let everybody kind of form their own opinion before I say it. I think it's got a little grassiness. Not grass the way you get New Zealand grassiness, but Ron kind of hit it earlier when he and I were talking when we first opened it. More hay, and not farmy hay, for those who know what farmy hay is. Not so much farmy hay, but actual silage. Not necessarily walking in the barn and smelling the warm animals, but more silagey. And then we had somebody who said it smells like cherry wood chips. I think that's a great description. It amused me. I can see that too. And then I also think it has a little bit of salinity. Last week we talked quite a bit about the salinity, the saltiness that the pick pool had. And this, I think, has a little bit of that saltiness too. Not anywhere near to that extent as the pick pool had.
A couple of things you'll notice on the tasting sheet. The harvests are conducted by hand. So when you look at the scale of wine production, obviously humans, just like in any business, humans are some of the most expensive parts of doing business. And when you read that a wine is hand harvested, that's just going to inherently add to the cost. Although in many great wine growing regions, and of course the foothills of the Andes Mountains, which is where this one comes from in Argentina, the vineyards are high enough altitude, probably steep enough that they can't do machine harvesting. So it's all hand harvested. And we should talk a little bit about Mendoza. Mendoza is the largest wine producing region of Argentina. Argentina is, depending on what list you read, the 5th largest wine producing country in the world. And some people say that China is starting to come up. I saw a list that indicated China was going to be up, and that's a whole nother discussion. I can't wait for some Chinese wines to hit our market. I know we've got a couple of reps on here. If you ever see a Chinese wine, I got to get some because I'd really like to taste it. So these are harvested, and then the grapes are placed in small concrete vats. So when you look at the things that wine can be fermented in, it can be fermented in stainless steel, it can be fermented in concrete, it can be fermented in oak, and each of those does something a little bit different. Stainless steel is completely inert. You don't get anything interaction with it. Oak is obviously oak, so the wood's gonna impart some characteristics. There's gonna be a little bit of evaporation of it. And then the concrete is kind of in the middle. And I often find that wines that are done in concrete, you almost get some of that salinity, and that might be more of a mental thing than an actual thing. But these are done in concrete vats. Most likely, although I couldn't find anything, the vats are maybe buried in the ground. And they used to do that historically because the ground would cool the grapes as they fermented. And now, of course, modern technology, all of the stainless steel vats that wine is fermented in are cooled anyway to control the speed of the fermentation. So after they're fermented, then they're aged in these eggs. And these eggs, they look like mini little spaceships. It's like a big concrete egg with their stands that look like fins. Looks like you get in it and rocket yourself to the moon or something. But so the grapes are harvested without skin maceration, so they don't let them sit on the skin very often. They're pressed and then they're fermented in the concrete vats.
We've had people commenting now already on the taste. I have not commented. We've been talking about the smell. Yes, I agree. There's a little bit of lemon. I would think that's in there. I get a little strawberry, just a touch. Often in rosés, I get more strawberry than this one. I think this is more that Provence style that Ron was talking about versus maybe the deep rosés. They're probably a little bit more or a little less salinity. So somebody commented here on a word that I use regularly. I don't get this in this wine, but I regularly use the term fruit poop or fruit poops. I get fruit poops. And it's how I describe often old world wines that have what I call old world funk to it. And it is actually, you get sometimes a Barney characteristic. And I talked about the Barney characteristic just a minute ago, how you walk into a barn. I'm a farm girl, actually. My family's farmers. Yeah, you walk into... Well, I'm not, but my family is. You walk into a barn and you smell the cows and the silage and everything all mixed in, and the manure and everything else, and it's Barney. That actually can be really a great taste unless it's going overboard, and we've had wines that have gone overboard, and that's sometimes what I would call fruit poops, where you still get the cherry or the blackberry, but then you get the little Barneyness, or a lot of the Barneyness. Doesn't always have to be little. So I don't get that in here. I get the silage that I talked about earlier on the nose. I don't get the Barneyness on the taste. What do you get?
I get a little of that. I don't get lemon. I don't know if maybe the acid is, because it's got good acid, so maybe the acid sort of tricks you into thinking lemon, like citrus.
Kelly said maybe tangerine.
Yeah, maybe something a little bit more orange-ish than lemon-ish. So I get a textural characteristic, a sort of a pithy textural characteristic, almost like tannin. It doesn't dry my mouth, but I get a little bit of a texture with on my tongue and the roof of my mouth. That's really nice. If you haven't looked at the map, take a look at the map, and I'll tell you where there's a subregion of Perdriel. So the subregion of Perdriel is about 13 miles south of Mendoza. So if you look on the map, and kind of like right in the middle, you see Mendoza and the city of Mendoza. Just south of that is where this little region is. If you look at Argentina north to south on the map, the major characteristic of, okay, so like almost all wine regions, the major characteristics are you want to look for bodies of water, you want to look for, and that's rivers, lakes, oceans, seas. You want to look at and for mountains. And of course, here between Chile and Argentina, we have the Andes Mountains. The Andes Mountains influence anything and everything within Argentina. They cast a huge rain shadow. So your weather systems move from west to east, and that huge mountain range blocks all of the rain. So it's almost like arid. You know, it's dry. They get very, very little rainfall. Their water supply comes from all the snow melt from the Andes that runs down into the wine growing regions. The other thing is that the vineyards are at pretty high altitude. So in Mendoza, you're talking maybe 30 or 3,000 or 3,100 feet above sea level. If you go north, if you look on your map, just north of that, the region of Salta has some of the highest vineyards in the world. They're like 3,800 feet. So pretty high vineyards. And what that does is it adds to the day to night temperature swing, so the diurnal temperature swing. So during the day, when the sun is out, you've got the grapes that are above cloud cover, above a whole bunch of stuff, so they're technically like closer to the sun, they talk about. But you also have a situation where maybe on the slope, on the aspect, so if the vines are on a slope, the aspect of the sun being down on them concentrates the sun, so they heat up quite a bit. But then when the sun goes down, the altitude allows for things to cool off huge, so that you get this big swing in temperatures day to night. And at night, when it cools down like that, it actually shuts the ripening of the grapes off. So that they basically are sort of like in this limbo state at night, and that extends the growing season, extends the harvest season, so that those grapes can get more complex, develop acidity, maintains the acidity, and really makes for interesting wine. And that's the sort of the telltale sign of these wines, is they're almost all grown at altitude.
These wines being rosés, or what are you referring to?
Wines of Mendoza,
Okay.
wines of Argentina, wines of Salta,
Okay.
things like that.
So, Angela, you're like older fruit. It's funny, we had a salad tonight before dinner. Before, we're gonna eat pizza later. So we had a salad before we started this, and I put apples on it. And I actually thought the apple that I use was kind of gets that mushiness that I think happens when apples start kind of getting past their time. And yes, I can see that in here. This would have gone well with our salad. I also get that in sparkling sometimes. So.
Well, let's see. Anything else I want to talk about? I mentioned that Argentina is the 5th largest wine producing country in the world. The order of that typically goes Italy, France, Spain, United States, and Argentina. One list I saw suggested that China was above Argentina. And after Argentina, then it goes Australia, Chile, Germany, South Africa, and then China, but lists vary with whatever. But if you haven't read anything about China getting into the wine world, China is huge, obviously, in the country. If you look at a map in the wine belt and where wines are grown, a huge swath of the country exists there. They're making a ton of wine. They're just not exporting it. But I predict with the technology, with the emerging market, there's going to be a lot of wine that comes out of China, and it's probably going to be, over the course of time, pretty good. They've been doing it for a long time. They just have to get it out into the world. So it'd be cool.
Yeah.
It'd be very cool. I mean, they're growing everything, so.
All right.
Any other questions? Comments?
Mark gets a little tannin in here.
A little bit of tannin?
That would make sense. Because it's got skin contact, which is why it's pink.
But it's something more. It's kind of tannin, it's kind of not tannin.
It's kind of tannin and acid. When you're talking to everybody, you're watering. You keep swallowing, so clearly there's a lot of acid going on. Are you reading it? You can read it out loud.
So Diane asks, she's been to Europe and she's tried some wines, and you don't find that European wines go to your head. I can't see the rest of it.
The same way as American wines. Is that common for American wines to have more of an alcohol or more alcohol? Funny? Yes and no?
Yes. So alcohol comes strictly from, fermentation is, of course, yeast and sugar create alcohol and CO2 and a couple other things. So the riper the grapes, the more potential alcohol. So if I take a Cabernet grown in Napa, and I take a Cabernet or a Cabernet blend grown in France, in Bordeaux, the regions are completely different. France is a much cooler climate. Napa, warmer climate. So the grapes can get riper in a warmer environment. And therefore, if they have more sugar because they're more ripe, when they ferment it, they will have a higher alcohol. Versus a cooler climate, the grapes won't get as ripe. When they ferment them, they won't have as high of alcohol content. So absolutely, there's an alcohol difference. And when you are blind tasting, if you're blind tasting a series of wines and you are looking for alcohol, you will find that the higher alcohol wines will be from hotter climates. And that's a great way to start to identify where those are coming from.
So we have a question. Elaine, thank you for asking. It's just a lot for me to type, so I'm going to have Ron address it. She wants to know what tannin is.
So tannin. Tannin is a substance that is found in for wines particularly, is found in the skins, in the seeds, and the stems. There's also tannin found in tea and other things, other food and other things in nature. But the result of tannin in red wine, because it's found in the skins, when you age the wine and you ferment the wine in the skins, the wine extracts the tannin, and that's TANNIN. And when you drink the wine and it has high tannins, it has a sensation of drying out your mouth. So when you drink the wine, and we might get a little bit in the red one here, the tannin actually binds to the protein in your saliva and sucks the saliva out of your mouth and leaves your mouth dry. So you get that sort of like when a cat licks your hand and it's really rough.
That's what Sarah's referring to in her comment, Elaine.
Yeah, you get this sort of grippy sensation on your tongue, on your lips, on your gums, and that's a completely normal thing. But you find that more in red wines because they spend more time in contact with the skins than in rosés and white wines. And some grapes themselves have more tannin in them. So, for example, they talk about the grapes that are the most tannic in the world. Cabernet, Syrah, Tannat, and Nebbiolo are the sort of the four most tannic grapes. And of course, winemaking goes into that because if they don't have as much skin contact, you're not going to get all of that, the tannin. But that's what tannin is. The other place you'll find tannin is in tea. So if you are a tea drinker...
One of the other places.
One of
the
the
obvious
places,
place. Yeah. An obvious place.
And you sort of get that sort of grippy sensation just a little bit in tea. That's the tannin that comes from the tea.
So I think that actually is a great segue into the next wine, because Ron mentioned that one of the foremost tannic grapes in the world, and this is not per Ron and Lorraine, this is per experts, is Syrah. And there is...
This is a blend of Shiraz, Grenache, and Merlot. So this is the Pepperjack. This is the Barossa Red from Pepperjack, which is in Barossa, Australia. Barossa. I don't do a very good Australian accent.
No, you don't.
It's just rude. Anyway, so this is the 2014 Barossa Red. And you will see that the sheet that you have says 2013. So...
This is an interesting story. So
no, it's an annoying story.
Well, it's kind of interesting too.
Okay, it's interestingly annoying. So when I'm doing the research on this wine, I looking at all the websites, looking at their website, looking at a whole bunch of different stuff, and I can't find any text sheets on it. The website is not really set up the way that some of the other ones are, and so I see that this wine is actually imported by Treasury Wine Estates. So on the back it says imported by TWE Imports, that's Treasury Wine. Just so happens that through our wine world and our wine connections and our distributors that I know the rep out of Chicago for Treasury Wine Estates. So I send her a quick email, say, hey, I'm looking for this. And she explains to me that this wine is actually no longer imported into the United States because at some juncture, somebody along the road, whether it was with Pepperjack or who knows where, failed to get a label approved. And so if you fail to get a label approved by the TTB, they will not allow you to sell your wine in the States. So I got the 2013 text sheet from her, but she could not find the 2014. That being said, I'm going to go back to my statements on the Chardonnay. This is a wine that is probably made year in and year out pretty much the same way. So it is sort of the house style. They're going for that blend so that's going to represent from year in, year out. That instills confidence in the consumer so they know from every single year what they're getting off the shelf. And that's the way a lot of wines are made. Once you start to hit maybe that $25, $30, $35, you're going to start to see maybe a little bit more vintage variation because they're not going to try to emulate the same wine every single year. They're going to sort of do what the vintage gives them, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense.
Does that make sense?
I think that one of the things about a $10 bottle or a $12 bottle or 15 or 20 is that you go and you pick it up, and every time you pick it up, you want it to be exactly the same as it was last time you tried it. So that's kind of what Ron is talking about. When you start getting into maybe 30, 40, 50 and above, you're hitting a market that is more geeky. I'll use that because I think we're very geeky, and we're interested in what's happening with the vintage, what it did that year, and not so much about saying, well, I had this last year and it was amazing and it's got to be amazing this year too. And not saying it's not amazing, but we're not expecting it to be exactly the same. We're excited about the variations, and we're interested to see what happened that year versus 3 years earlier when we had it.
Well, that being said, we've been at some wineries, very prestigious wines, where they're maybe $150 a bottle, and they'll talk about their blending process. And I'll talk a little bit about that with this one. And they sit down, they will blend through the wines and sort of come up with a final blend, and they'll taste it against the prior year. And what they've said is, amazingly, it comes out very similar. I'm guessing it comes out similar because that's the taste that they want that $150 bottle to be, right? But all that being said, this wine, I think, is probably pretty representative of what it was years and years, and we won't see another vintage in the States until they figure out their labeling.
We still have some, so if you like, you can get more of it.
We do still have some.
So
this is, as I said, blend of Shiraz, Grenache, Merlot. I could not find anything about the percentages of those. Just looking at it, I'm guessing it's mostly Shiraz, the least amount Merlot, and then Grenache to them when they're in the middle. For those of you that are not familiar, and I'll just say it, the Shiraz grape is the same grape as Syrah. So Syrah, Shiraz, same grape. It's pretty much just done on a labeling thing. So if you see it out of Australia, it's almost always labeled as Shiraz. If you see it out of every place in the world, almost every place else in the world, it's labeled Syrah.
Unless you're in the United States, and then it's either or. They do both.
Yeah, mostly Syrah.
Mostly, but
yeah,
we do see quite a few Shirazes.
The wines were on the text sheet. It says that the parcel of fruit were fermented separately in tradition-style fermenters, and what that means is that they took the Shiraz, the Grenache, and the Merlot, and they fermented them individually. They did not blend them, and that's interesting only because there are some wines in some wine regions where they are actually co-fermented, so that they'll harvest them all and then ferment them all together. But these are fermented separately, and then they're aged in American and French oak for 12 months before they're blended and bottled. So then they have all the basically finished wines in the barrel. Then they come together and they do a blending seminar. And the blending seminars are really all, and we've done them with winemakers, not obviously for their bottling, but as an exercise. And we've done them in the shop. And if anybody would be interested, we could maybe organize a blending seminar. They're awesome. They're fun.
We've had several of them.
We've had several of them. And we have a winery send us individual bottles of like Cab, Merlot, Malbec, Petit Verdot, Cab Franc, generally the 5 Bordeaux varietals. And then everybody gets to taste them individually and then blend them together and sort of see what that finished product is. So that's a pretty cool thing. So when they blend them, they bring them together and they start blending them and they measure out exactly what the wine that they're putting into the glass, and they come to a decision. Oftentimes it's the winemaker, oftentimes it's the winemaker and the winery owner, tasting room people, barrel room people, and they sort of do it as a collaborative effort. So,
Ron, would
yes.
you address screw caps versus corks versus vino locks and every other type of closure there is?
I will. I want to talk about the wine for just a second, though.
Okay.
So,
I liked somebody commented on Barb's easier to open on the couch with a screw cap. I like that. But
yeah.
We'll get to it, Barb.
When we first opened this, and we opened it so it could sort of breathe, I smelled it. So just like we smelled like a little silage or a little something maybe funky, farmy, rustic. Rustic is a good word. It's not.
Rustic is nicer.
It's not an offensive word, right?
Even though Barney is not offensive. Some people think it is.
Yeah. When you smell a wine, identifying whatever you smell, even if it, like if you'd say it in normal company, might be offensive. It's not offensive in the wine world. Chardonnays, often one of the characteristics that Lorene gets off of them is cream corn. You didn't get that one this one.
I did not.
One of the characteristics that I occasionally get off of Chardonnay, and I did not get it in this one, is bile.
And that sounds really terrible. That
Yeah.
one is kind of terrible.
Okay, so bile is not
It's a good word.
no, it's generally not a favorable way to describe what something smells like.
Yeah. Or tastes like.
Or tastes like. Unless, of course, you're vomiting. Then
Would you just...
okay, so I do get occasional bile in Chardonnays, and it's not pleasant, really. But that being said, I did not get it in this. In the last one, in the Pepperjack, I initially got what I sort of characterize as Australia synthetic. I have a characteristic then that I pick up in especially the Shiraz and the Cabs from Australia. That's sort of I talked last week about how I smell purple sometimes, like as a descriptor, even though purple doesn't smell. But it's like purple synthetic. And it's almost like a plastic synthetic characteristic. And again, it's just what I smell. That's actually burned off of this, and it's gotten a lot better.
I agree. It has.
Yeah.
Everything we tried last week, if I remember, it burned off too. Things changed
That's
drastically.
That's the importance of opening a bottle up and beating it up in the glass and really spending some time swirling. It really allows that wine to breathe, open up, and change over time. All right, so I do get a little smoke, little meat, little summer sausage. That's the Syrah.
Kelly, you said a little menthol. I get a little bit of that, more on the palate, like you. I think that's what you're saying.
And that's interesting because menthol, I never really.
You don't get that a lot.
And I don't attribute it to these grapes.
Yeah, you don't ever get it. Even when we're in California and Carneros, when we're driving down a lane with eucalyptus trees. Oh, maybe it's eucalyptus. Maybe it's eucalyptus you're getting, or I'm getting. I mean, anyway, eucalyptus trees. He doesn't even get it there. So He doesn't get
I get mint from Napa Cab. I get mint, and that's I associate mint with Cabernet.
With Cab.
Yeah, not with Merlot.
Blueberries? Do you get blueberries?
I don't like blueberries.
Yeah, that's too bad. So, yes, and cocoa, I agree. Yep.
All right. So let's talk about screw caps. Somebody pointed
Total
out.
fluke.
Somebody pointed out that we have 3 screw caps. Total fluke. Did not intend to do that, but with the my whole adage is like, do not judge a book by its cover. Do not judge a wine by its closure. There are synthetic corks, real corks made up of mashed, or synthetic corks made up of real mashed corks. There's glass closures called Vinolocks. There's screw caps. There's different types of screw caps. And with the technology that's come out in the screw cap industry, there is absolutely no reason to think just because a bottle has a screw cap that there's something inferior about it. In no way, shape, or form. And as I think Barb pointed out earlier, a lot easier to open. Pretty simple. And curiously, we will choose the wines that we might, if we're going to go, let's say, for example, out on a boat. We'll choose wines that have screw caps because it's going to be easier to open, it's going to be easier to close, and you can just drop into the ice in the cooler kind of mentality. I've got the 3 wines we're going to be tasting next week. I've got them sitting here. I'm going to talk about them. 2 out of the 3 are screw caps. And one of them is really interesting because that particular winery that I'll reveal in a second does some of their, actually I think they do all screw caps.
They do, and
they're like super geeky about it.
And they actually have done research and looked at the studies and
Chad's really geeky about screw caps.
Yeah.
So
it's a good thing.
One of the things that I learned from Chad Johnson was that screw caps breathe at about half the rate of natural cork. And so that's the argument for natural cork, is that they allow for a little bit of air exchange with the wine in the bottle so that bottle and the wine can sort of evolve. They talk about wine in a bottle being sort of this living creature that changes over time when you're aging it. And you want that a little bit to allow for a little bit of oxidative aging rather than reductive aging. Reductive aging is without any oxygen interplay. And oxidative aging is when you have a little bit of interplay with the wine. And with a Stelvin closure, a screw cap, breathing at about half the rate as a natural cork, the supposition there is that wine can last just as long, maybe longer, with a screw cap on it. And I think that 10, 20 years from now, we're going to see a whole ton of screw caps. All of that being said, I still like natural cork. The natural cork industry is doing a lot to improve their practices to eliminate cork bottles. And cork is a renewable resource. It comes from the cork oak tree. They harvest the bark, and they harvest it over and over and over and over again. So that lifetime of the cork oak tree, it's not like they're cutting them down to do this. They regrow the cork. So I'm going to talk about...
We do have one quick thing before you go too far. Is it really dry? It's certainly tannic, which is what I'm assuming you mean by dry. That's the appropriate term. Yeah, it's pretty tannic. And you know, tannins build. So even if we started with a Chardonnay and Chardonnay had a touch of tannin in it from oak, we'll say, I'm not saying it did, but if it did. And then the next one, Rosé, definitely had a touch of oak. It has the, touch of tannin with the skin contact. And then you get here. It's gone, it's continued to build. So this might seem more tannic as you drink it. So I actually really love that when I'm drinking red wine, especially towards the end of the night. And it's really like... the sensation on my throat is very cool. So I think this is tannic, but it's not crazy.
No.
I think it's actually very balanced. And that means that the tannins are a good amount. It's not spiking in tannin or acidity or...
It's a good amount.
Alcohol, whatever. So it's a good amount. He's making fun of me.
I'm not.
He likes to make fun of me, but whatever.
It's a good amount.
It is a good amount. It's a great amount. It's balanced.
I agree.
That means a good amount.
I agree.
Okay. Anyway, you want to talk. Go ahead and talk.
So you probably saw the map of Australia. Hopefully you got the map. So this is from Barossa Valley. If you look at the map, Barossa, my map, I printed it on draft because I can't waste ink.
Yes, those who know me out there, yes, that's me. I'm very frugal. I'm frugal.
It looks like all my cities on my map are just in the middle of a big white sheet of paper because the borders of the countries and regions don't show up. So, at any rate, so this is from Barossa Valley. Barossa is like the most famous, pretty much the most famous, not the biggest, but the most famous, one of the most famous wine growing regions in Australia, and it produces some amazing wines. It's relatively warm, which is interesting because it's fairly close to the coast. And the next one that's pretty famous is the Eden Valley. So Eden Valley is just interior a little bit because of the way the mountain ranges are lined up. The winds go in and they cool it down. In Australia, the primary grapes, I mean, you see all the grapes now, but the primary grapes are Shiraz, Syrah, and then Riesling is grown a lot in Eden Valley. And so they're really well known for their Rieslings. When you look at the wine world, and I didn't mention with South Africa, I should have. We talk about mountains, we talk about bodies of water. When we're talking about the big bodies of water, especially oceans, the big thing with that are the ocean currents. And so one of the things that we had to learn in wine classes were the names of a bunch of ocean currents. So if you think about the globe and the way it's laid out, with South America and Chile, you've got, first of all, one of the biggest, most influential ocean currents in the world is the Antarctic circumpolar ocean current that runs all the way around the Earth, but by the South Pole, by Antarctica. Because it's so cold down there, all that ocean current can access the entire globe. There's not continents in between Antarctica and the other continents, so that cool water can flow northwards. Unlike if you look at the North Pole, there's a whole bunch of continents in the way, so that you don't have that easy access to all the other huge bodies of water. So that Antarctic circumpolar band of ocean currents feeds, the one by Chile is the Humboldt Current. So it flows off of the Antarctic Current and flows up the coast of Chile, cooling off Chile. That's why Chile can be a really sort of cooler climate growing region. Then if you move over to Africa, the current that affects there is the Benguela Current. And that Benguela Current flows up from Antarctica and cools off South Africa. That's why those coastal regions of South Africa are very, very cool climate growing regions. Even though overall the country is super hot. You go inland, it's super, super hot. Then if you move over to Australia, you have sort of the similar thing. It's very close to that.
We get the point.
But the other thing that you have is this weird other warm current called the Lewin, I think I pronounced that correctly, current that sort of flows down around the south. So ocean currents are really, really important too. And so if you want to geek out, look at rivers and bodies of water. They create cooler climates. They create airflow. As rivers flow through, they create airflow that really helps vineyards.
It's Ron geeking out, so.
It is.
But we are getting close to time. And I know you guys say that Ron can talk as much as he wants, but I'm the wife, so.
Glad you cleared that up.
So I don't necessarily agree. Not that I don't like him talking, but I don't want him to bore you. And so I'm the one to draw him in and say, honey, enough. So he geeks out, obviously. That got a little long. Keep going. Thanks, Bart. Thanks, Melissa. I'm glad you guys are supporting me in this. So
finally, people on my side. Hello.
Have we had Bon Jovi's Rosé? We have not had Bon Jovi's Rosé, but we have had, who does LVE? John Legend's Rosé, and we carry it right now at Weston, and his Sparkling. So, have we had Bon Jovi's?
I don't think so.
And we've had many famous people's wines, but right now it's John Legend because I think he's just adorable. We have both of them; they're very good. So, quick John Legend story. So we have a bottle of Sparkling. We open a bottle of Sparkling, and I put it on Instagram, and I tag both LVE, luxury vineyard. Luxury vineyard. I think I don't. Yeah.
LVE is his brand. So I tag LVE, and I tag John Legend, and John Legend likes the picture on Instagram. I thought it was pretty cool.
That is very funny.
Have not had Drew Barrymore wine. I think they'd be really super flighty, don't you? I mean, Drew Barrymore is like...
Anyway, she's adorable. Zach Brown. Yes, thanks, Chris. We've had Zach Brown and
we have had Charles Woodson wine.
Yep.
There's a ton of sports people that do wines.
Yep.
A ton of them.
Zach Brown, we went to see him last year.
In concert
because we support him. I didn't know who he was. So I'm embarrassed. But I liked him. I enjoy him now. And Ron plays him. Country Fried. Yep. So, Mr. Wonderful. Okay, Crystal, you need to expand. Mr. Wonderful?
Is that me? Thank you. I don't know what you're talking about. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about next week wine. Next week, we've got a theme. This is like, we're not really doing themes.
No.
But,
and I think we explained why. One, we had some issues getting the wine in on time. And two, we're not extremely busy right now. So spending money on wine is something we have to do, but we have to watch the money too. So we're trying to use up some of our current inventory too. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we did have a request. Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank. Have not has his wines.
Oh.
He's
geeky about it.
No, he's an arrogant ass
about
it. I mean, maybe that's just his persona. Maybe he's a super nice guy. I have not had his wines.
We haven't.
Does he make wines? Does he?
He does. He's really big into it.
He's big into his wines, or into wines, but I don't know.
Anyway, yes. Thanks, Ange.
So next week we've got a request for a theme. So our theme next week is the Pacific Northwest. Pacific Northwest. When we talk about Pacific Northwest, we mean pretty much Oregon and Washington. So we're going to be doing 2 from Oregon, 1 from Washington. The first wine that we're going to be doing is from Oregon, and it is the 2018 Firesteed Pinot Gris from Willamette Valley. The second wine we're doing is a wine that is very near and dear to us. We have carried it for a long time. 2
wines that we're doing next week are very near and dear.
Very near and dear.
Seriously.
The middle wine we're going to do next week is the Ken Wright Cellars Pinot Noir from Willamette. You might not be able to get the glare off. So Ken Wright Cellars, we have visited them several times. We started grapes with Ken. My sister and brother-in-law live out there, and they go to his release parties every year and buy, tons of wine. He makes great stuff. This is just their straight entry-level Willamette versus some of their vineyard designate, which if you're looking for some of their vineyard designate, they're expensive, but they are phenomenal, like Oregon Pinots. Amazing. And then the last one, second one that's very near and dear to us, is the... so I mentioned Chad, who does the, who's really super geeky and talked to me about screw caps. And then I mentioned who I want to have on to do like a interplay where we taste along. And that's,
so he's in one side of the country and we're here. And, well, I won't be a part of that. And it'd be split between the two. Kind of like the news.
Yeah, we're going to try to do like an interview thing where we can taste. But that's Corey Burnell from Dusted Valley Vintners. And so we're going to be doing the Boomtown Syrah next week, Monday. So the thing about these guys, if you're not familiar with Boomtown or Dusted Valley Vintners, is that they are from Wisconsin. So Corey is from Marathon City, Chad is from Chippewa Falls, and they married sisters who are both from Edgar. And super nice guys, just true Wisconsinites. And so we're going to taste their Syrah next week. And my goal is that within a few weeks, I suspect we're going to be trapped in our homes for a little bit longer. We are going to... Corey did a live one, Kelly? I'll have to check it out. We are going to hopefully be able to do that. What I'd like to do, though, is probably like one of the one of the Boomtown labels, and then maybe 2 of the Dusted Valley labels. The thing is that the Dusted Valley wines are a little bit more expensive, but we might just do it. And
if it's just us drinking, we're just drinking with them. Right,
exactly. So, all right. Anybody have any other questions, comments, concerns, requests? We appreciate you coming out and tasting with us. Yes. It's fantastic to continue to have this level of engagement. We greatly appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Next week,
Cheers.
Taste those three. We actually have the week after that picked out too. So if anybody wants to buy the next 2 weeks worth of wine, go into the shops. Sarah, who's on here, I think has it organized. I think Jen, I saw Jen was on here. She's our assistant manager. We've got Blair. I saw Blair was on here. Blair's our manager at Weston. And we've got all the wines set out. And you can buy 2 weeks and continue to do it. So thank you very much. Cheers. Have a great evening. Have a great week. The snow is going to melt. It's going to get nice. And yeah. Absolutely, Bart. Cheers.